We are talking about another situation where if you want to start auditioning head coaches for the NFL, and Thomas Brown has been, interviewed for head coaching positions. He has been interviewed for the offensive coordinator spot in Chicago and somehow was beaten by Shane Waldron. I can't imagine being in the room with those two guys separately and then interviewing them and then walking out of those two interviews and saying, like, that's my guy, and it's Shane Waldron, and then saying Thomas Brown is the guy who I'm iffy about. It's absolutely insane. That all being said, if you are in any way a cheap McCaskey, which the McCaskies are, and you're just thinking about Thomas Brown next year, or you're not going to pay the bank for Kyle Shanahan or Ben Johnson or whatever it is, and I'm putting my prediction in this based on I'm McCaskey proofing my prediction, because in a logical world, a good NFL team would throw a blank check at Shane Waldron, or I'm sorry, at Kyle Shanahan, would throw a blank check at Ben Johnson and say, please come over here. But I'm McCaskey proofing this prediction. I think they're going to give Thomas Brown a 6 to 5 game audition and then hire him as head coach next year. That's my kind of like future proofing of this team.
And that's the bad way to go, because you're going to get stuck in like an Antonio Pierce situation like the Raiders had, where like, okay, sure, you come in and you make it look better than the guys before you that were terrible. And like I said, I think some of Thomas Brown's success, it comes from the failures of Shane Waldron. I mean, because we're looking at how much better he is than what the guy who was here before did. And that's not the way to go, though, because who's Thomas Brown bringing in as his staff? Right? Like, so we're talking about
pretty well connected.
He is, but what I'm saying though, J2K, is like, even when it comes to Ben Johnson, who's very well connected, I'm still a little iffy on that, because where I think this team is from a talent wise perspective, from how young the quarterback is and everything like that, is in a place where we just need some real experienced head coaches in here. Like I said, that's why I was making a push for Jim Harbaugh last offseason. I don't care if you like him, don't like him. I personally don't have much of an opinion on him that way. But what I do know is he's been in this league. He's got a good staff underneath him. He's a real good coach. He knows how to win. He's proven he knows how to win. I mean, if Kyle Shanahan is available, that is number one target, period. Right? Like, if he's available. If not, I would still, feel better about getting another guy in here that's actually had some experience as a head coach. If Kevin Stefanski becomes available, sure, give me Kevin Stefanski. He's been coach of the year 2 times. He was really hamstrung by his ownership and the way that thing went. But at one point, he had the Browns kind of fixed in a very tough division.
Take Mike Vrabel with Thomas Brown staying as offensive coordinator.
And that I wouldn't prefer that. However, that would still be an upgrade over what we have right now. Right. So yeah. I do think you need to bring a guy in here that's going to flip this thing around from a staff perspective. And I'm not just so convinced that an unproven guy has all the tools necessary to be able to do that. It would still be, my whole like overall just quote of this season is, I'm done with hope. And I keep saying it. I'm done hoping. I want to dominate by design like these good teams do. I don't want to hope that the next guy we bring in here becomes a good coach. I don't want to hope for anything anymore. Let's get the guy that's a good coach. You know what I mean? Let's just go out there and do it and have more structure and have more confidence, even if the ceiling for the potential of the coach isn't that high. I would just so much rather have a good floor from a head coach right now, in my opinion.
Before J2K, and J2K, I want you to have the next 5 minutes all on your own
and
respond to all this. There are things that I think the Bears should do, that I think the Bears want to do, and that I think the Bears will do.
Right.
And so, so this is where I'm giving you my predictions, right? Like Shanahan, Ben Johnson, blank checks, eat it. You're an $8 billion franchise. Ben Johnson, Kyle Shanahan, blank check priority. John Lynch is included in that. You fire Ryan Poles, you bring him in, you fuck off into the sunset, George McCaskey. That is the one option. The likelihood of that happening is about 5%. Maybe less. The level 2 option is the like Kevin Stefanski, Mike Vrabel, like Paulie wants. And what I want is like actual NFL head coaches that have had success and could probably elevate your team to a higher level while simultaneously kind of like bringing some respect to that locker room. Then there's the McCaskey way. Then there's the like, well, we already got this guy in the building and we really respect guys that are already here and we give them multiple chances. And it's going to turn into a Thomas Brown interim head coach into a full head coach, and it's a 2-year waste of time. Lovey's a waste of time. I'm sorry. Like, all of these guys are a waste of time. It's all just mid-level shit. And while this is what I'm saying is like there's tiers to this, and I'm giving you guys the McCaskey realistic tier, which is the Thomas Brown 6-game tryout. See what he's got, because they might hire him anyway. Guys, this is the horrific truth, is that they might just keep Eberflus till the end of the season, fire him on Black Monday, interview Thomas Brown, and then just give him the job anyway. If that's the fucking case, give him a 5-game audition. For the love of God, give it to him. And go for it, J2K. Break it down.
Well, no, before you go for it, one thing's been kind of consistent here about this whole thing, that this team holds on to failures. David, you said it for like 30% too long. Velus Jones should have been cut. What's his name? Chase Claypool should have been gone. Nate Davis should have been gone. Matt Eberflus should have been gone too. Go ahead, J2K.
Well, I agree with a lot of your points, Dave. Giving Thomas Brown a chance to be the interim head coach is something I would like to see. Now, to talk about some of these coaches and their background. So first, Thomas Brown, he's got a ton of connections. If there's a guy who is next in line to be a head coach, it is Thomas Brown in the NFL. And I say that including guys like Ben Johnson, some of the other, Liam Cohen, maybe Zach Robinson, some of these offensive coordinators who've just gotten promoted and are looking really good. Thomas Brown has tons of connections. The whole staff with Carolina was all Frank Reich. You've got Josh McCown, who is on that staff, who is also pseudo-offensive coordinator in Minnesota. You've got the whole Sean McVay staff. Thomas Brown's, also comes from that lineage of Shanahan. So there are so many people, head coaches, that would not block somebody getting promoted from their staff to go and work for Thomas Brown. I truly, wholeheartedly believe that. I think Thomas Brown, he was someone that I was talking about when, we fired Luke Getsy. And I'm like, there's this guy, Thomas Brown. We got to check him out. Everything I'm hearing about this guy is great. He's got a ton of connections. Ben Johnson is a mastermind, and I have zero problems with him being our head coach. My concern, though, is that he really didn't come from anywhere. So he doesn't have a whole bunch of connections. He's basically got Detroit coaching connections, and that's what he's going to bring with him. So let me throw out a name here that isn't talked about too much. Todd Monken of Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator. He's got Lamar Jackson MVP 2 years, right? Potentially a third year. He's always talked up in like the MVP top, 3 category. He comes from not only Baltimore, but he also comes from Georgia. And Mike McDaniel, who became the head coach over at Seattle, also came through this coaching pipeline. So not only do you get, an offensive coordinator that has turned Lamar Jackson into a superstar, you also get that pipeline from Baltimore, who always pump out good coaches. You also get that pipeline from Georgia, who also pump out good coaches. So he's a name I really like. Another name, Buffalo's offensive coordinator, Joe Bradley, is a guy who I also really like, just because he's been doing it for so long, and you've seen how many pieces to that Buffalo offense that has been, taken away and changed out, and they're still explosive on offense. So I love that. Now, some of these other coaches, I heard John Gruden's name pop up.
I mean, we're combining a lot of thoughts here, but I think it just turns into you get Joe Brady, you have no idea what he is as a game manager. You have no idea what he is as a coordinator. Like, you know what he can do as a coordinator, but that's why part of my thought process is give Thomas Brown and the whole argument of him being a booth coach, which is very relevant. If this guy wants to be a head coach in the NFL, he can't call it from the booth. He's got to be down there. He's got to be in the game, in the situation. Like, I'm okay with even Eric Washington being a interim head coach while Thomas Brown is still the offensive coordinator. And if Thomas Brown doesn't want to be a head coach and he wants to call plays from the booth, then you know what? The guy from Tampa Bay, Liam Cohen, right? Make him your head coach and make Thomas Brown. They're like this in terms of scheme and schematics and what they do and what the trees that they came from. And I'm with you, J2K. Like, you can combine these things and mix and match, but the whole point of this conversation 20 minutes ago where it started is start future proofing your team, because right now it's all Caleb. Guys, it's all Caleb. The only thing that matters is Caleb. Can we agree? Like, you can build a team. This team is so talented. I thought I had a question on my notes and thought experiment. If you plug Jim Harbaugh in to any of these games and we review these games, how many of them do you win versus lose? Right? We're talking about a team that competes in the NFC North with 7 or 8 wins versus
also
being a philosophy.
He would have gone out and gotten us offensive linemen. And that's the issue I have right now is I know a lot of this blame falls onto Eberflus. My issue is that I think while we have a lot of talent, we're unbalanced. Our offensive line did not have the depth it needed, had a bunch of question marks going into the season. We spent a 3rd-round draft pick on a kid I really like, but a kid who is injured, played at a small school, very raw technically. It's going to take him time. So that's not a current solution. It's a future solution. So I have a lot of issues with how Poles built this team. And I think Jim Harbaugh would have walked in here and said, "Oh no, we're not taking Rome Odunze. We're going to take J.C. Latham out of Alabama, and he's going to be our left tackle, or he's going to compete for the left tackle job. Maybe we move Braxton to swing tackle. We're going to go out and get a real center. We're going to get somebody who can back up Tevin Jenkins if he goes down. And, oh, by the way, I've noticed this Nate Davis guy doesn't like practicing. Well, he's going to practice, and I'm going to find someone to, put a fire underneath his butt behind him, and that's my biggest criticism of the roster build of Poles to date."
Yeah. And, just to speak on that, that's why that whole building from the outside in is a little bit backwards and teams build from the inside out because, I said it during the offseason. What's the quickest way to implode an offense? Bad offensive line. I mean, that could destroy you in so many categories, even if you're able to overcome it and come away with big plays in the clutch. Guess what? Yellow flag, holding, try that again. 10 yards back. Like, it's just so deflating when your offensive line sucks. Plus, it's getting your quarterback killed at the end of the day. So that's cute that you got the quarterback at 1-1. But if you can't keep him upright, I mean, I know heading into the Minnesota Vikings game, he was the most sacked quarterback in the league. You don't learn anything from having your head bashed into the ground over and over. I know Peyton Manning has a rookie interception record, 28 interceptions. You could learn from that. And he did. He took time to sit there and review his mistakes and learn from it. You're not learning anything from just getting hit over and over and over. If anything, that makes you see ghosts, that develops bad habits, and those things tend to linger throughout careers for quarterbacks, especially when they happen at a very young time in their career in the NFL. And so, we were going off about this, and it was one of the extremely unpopular takes I had during the offseason where, like I said, even if Marvin Harrison Jr. drops to 9, I'm happy because I'm getting a bigger haul for trading back because I need a defensive end still. I need a center still. Like, you could sit there and tell me, oh, you want to take the best player available. And I get that draft philosophy and it's worked for some teams. However, when you have obvious holes still on this roster, you need to get that stuff straightened out. That's a lot more important than trying to take, a guy that winds up playing wide receiver 3 for you all year. Right.
You spent a top 10 draft pick, $20 million, and a 4th-round draft pick on 2 wide receivers and 0 offensive line help out of those assets. Keenan Allen could have been a starting offensive lineman and a backup rookie 4th-round offensive lineman right there.
100%. And so, like, I was on one show that asked the question of, did Ryan Poles neglect the offensive line? Now, I wouldn't use such a harsh word as neglect, because when you look at his 3 years here, as far as drafting goes, you did spend a 1st-round pick on Darnell Wright, and you did spend a 3rd-round pick this year on Amagaji. But after that, it's all 6th and 7th round picks, right? Now, Amagaji's hurt. So, like, really, I mean, you didn't neglect it, but you didn't really address it. You sat there, you tried to band-aid the center position through free agency over and over and over. And you didn't really show this thing the attention that it needed. Like, the offensive line here was clearly bad. And, yeah, to go out and sign Nate Davis and think that he's going to sit there and solve problems for you, that imploded in their face. And, when you said Jim Harbaugh would have wanted, had Nate Davis practice, man, Mike Vrabel, when they got rid of Nate Davis, Mike Vrabel came out and said, yeah, we got rid of him because I want a guy who will practice. Like, there was your scouting report on him, man.
Well, I'm in the minority, but I actually like the Nate Davis signing at first because of his play on the field. Now, he doesn't look like that player he was in Tennessee. Clearly, something's up with him. I'm starting to get the sense that once his mom passed, and I think there's some other personal issues he was going through, that this last contract was him saying, I think I'm done with the NFL. I'm just going to show up as much as I can to get a paycheck. And, the likelihood of him going to another team with this type of attitude and regression in his play and making any money, it's just not there. So I think he made a business decision to walk out of it. He was a very good offensive lineman at Tennessee.
I agree with that.
I guess I would have one more comment, and Crimson participating a lot in the chat. We just haven't put a lot of it up. And I said Caleb was the future, and that's really all that matters. I don't mean that literally, right, Crimson, in the sense that no one else matters. It's a 53-man roster. It's 11 starters on offense, 11 starters on defense. But when you go into last year, right, with getting rid of Fields and taking a risk on Caleb, that to me felt a lot more risky than it does this year. And I guess my closing question to you two is, do you feel better, or do you feel that it's a little bit more easy to get the coaching decision right rather than when you need to find a quarterback? Because I feel like we found the quarterback. I think the quarterback situation has been settled. I feel much more comfortable going into this offseason, hoping that I feel a little bit more. If we get the wrong coach, I'll know it right away. I'll see it. I'll know it. I will doubt it. If we get the wrong guy, I'll know. If we get the right guy, I'll probably know. Whereas when we got Caleb, I had hopes, I had dreams, but I had no idea. And where are we at moving into next season? And how do you guys feel about it? Because I think that we're in as fucked up as it is with this, how much of a wasted lame duck year this is. I guess the silver lining is that next year, if you go into it with the right coaching staff, you can get me back in to being hyped up for this team.
So I'll start. For me, it's actually the coaching staff is very, very important, obviously. But I gotta see the assets we have this offense spent on the offensive line and defensive line. Offensive line, obviously a priority. Defensive line, the next priority. And I'm talking about like as a group. Like I would like to see, a starting center, a high a second, 2 second rounds. If we have 2/3 or at least 1/3, all those being spent on offensive linemen, maybe a defensive end, a defensive tackle, first round draft pick spent on the best player at either trench, right? So that's what will give me optimism. I think the coaching is still going to be a huge question mark, just because I don't see what a lot of fans are asking for. Well, they're asking for, we want someone who's got experience, who's going to be a good head coach. Well, a head coach that's had experience is also a head coach that's been fired. Dan Quinn was fired in Atlanta, right? We could all hope that Shanahan gets fired, but I don't see that happening. There's 10 teams in the league that hope that Shanahan gets fired. We actually have a lot of good coaching on our staff, good coaches on our staff. I mean, a lot of people target Chris Morgan, our offensive line coach, and say he's a bad coach. And then you go and look at like who he's been with. Had Eberflus not kept Chris Morgan, Morgan would have been in Washington with Dan Quinn because they coached together in Atlanta. And they, given Washington's success, all their fans would be like, oh, we got this great offensive line coach. You go back to Washington of 2011 and 2013, you look at that coaching staff with Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Chris Morgan's on that team.
The guy from
Hightower's on that team. Sean McVay, Slowick. I mean, you're just reading off like really talented coaches, and there's Chris Morgan sitting there amongst all these really quality coaching groups and trees and stuff. So, like, I don't think he's a bad coach. I think people talk about Hightower and Washington as good coaches around the league. These are quality guys. Our secondary coach, John Hoke, he's a quality coach. So I don't think that we just have bad coaching. I think that's kind of a simple way of attacking the team when you don't know all the nuances and how much things are intertwined. But I think that where it starts, like at the top with Eberflus, he just doesn't have the guys around him like the Thomas Browns who can fire up the team, and he can just sit back and be just the head coach. Had he had, Eric Washington as defensive coordinator, Thomas Brown as offensive coordinator, and he can sit back and be the head coach, and for a couple of years, then I think that staff, same names, different results.
Yeah, as a coach, you're not playing the game, right? So the results come from the players on the field, comes from the execution on the field. But I think what I'm seeing is like, we talk about the NFL and we talk about how, 2-3 plays a game can make the difference in a game, right? So like the variable for failure to success, like that it's small, man. It's very small. Like there's a lot of good coaches in the NFL. Hell, most of them are good coaches because they're in the NFL, right? And so it comes down to the fine details. And when you look at the fine details, where one Hail Mary, a blocked kick, hell, I'll even say another blocked kick in this game away from, 3 victories, really. Like, and then if those 3 plays go differently, hell, if those even 2 plays go differently, right? Like the block kick against the Packers and the Hail Mary against Washington, and those are wins instead of losses, then these conversations don't even exist.
Yeah,
right? Like,
so if we're 7-4, we've watched the same exact plays, just minus 3 plays going our way instead of against us, right? I mean, everybody's excited and they're all, we're all saying Flus is great. And
no,
are you
no.
kidding me? If we're
The difference is
$7-4
J2K. The chat would be disagreeing with us because I think me and David would still be on the same thing because we're seeing what we're seeing, and we're trying to take the overall result and the overall eye test of the consistency of it all, and that tells a different story, right? Like, we understand those 1-2 plays that go bad that make a difference, and that's really the masses would be so excited. I think me and David would still kind of be on this whole, this is kind of just like a curtain, like inflated, because overall the thing consistently doesn't go well.
I think a lot of what Paulie has changed my mind on is what your standard is are we competing with the Packers for last place in the NFC North, or are we competing with the Lions and the Eagles for the NFC Championship? And that's where Paulie has changed my mind, where you have a quarterback that can, I'm sorry, Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts, I'll take Caleb Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's what you put around him. Can you put a defense and a team and a coaching staff around Caleb Williams? Because right now, if you put a coaching staff and a team as good as the Eagles have and as good as the Lions have around Caleb Williams, I would take Caleb Williams over Jared Goff and Jalen Hurts 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10 right now. That guy's a fucking stud. And we have a 2 to 3 year window to do that for this guy, because you can compete in this. This is not a team where, and I think this is part of it, where, people, we're going to take a step back, reshuffling coaching staffs. Thomas Brown in 2 games shows you that that's not true. Because in 2 games, Thomas Brown has been much more effective than Shane Waldron has with an entire offseason. So you give me Kyle Shanahan, you give me Ben Johnson, you give me any coach that can actually coach this team up to be a complementary football team and like a staff that can back each other up, then I don't think you're taking a step back next year. I don't think you need to take a step back to take a step forward with coaching in modern NFL times. I think the right coaching staff will elevate you instantly. The same way we just talked about with this team is all you need to do is replace Matt Eberflus with Jim Harbaugh. And I think we're talking about the situation you guys are talking about. It's a 7-win team. It's a team that's competing for an NFC title game, where it's competing for a playoff berth. Because the only difference right now in terms of this team is coaching and how it's being mismanaged.